What's up, guys? Happy Tuesday. Welcome back to another episode of Eat, Train, Prosper. Today, Brian and I are going to dig into a Instagram question that came in from our last week's June Q&A episode that we thought would be a great idea to explode into its own episode. And what we have is our top 5 tips for a really productive gaining period. Before we jump into this, we're going to get through some updates Brian and I have. So Brian, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, as far as my diet goes, I think I thought that I was about to start gaining again, but realized that it was actually just a mistake and I'm still dieting. So in reality, what happened here was we had this great discussion on our last ETP, and you suggested that I really dial it in, cut the fats down, cut some carbs down, up the protein a little. And I did that for a few days. I even set a new low. I hit 184.0. And then it was literally right around that moment where I think whatever euphoria I was feeling from dieting and, slowly maneuvering towards the bottom of this body weight range that I discussed could be optimal. Things just kind of shifted really quickly, like almost overnight. I started having more food focus. I had diet fatigue. My sleep wasn't great. And this happened a couple days in a row. I started having cravings. I mentioned on the last one that I had a bad training session. Luckily, training sessions have been great. I'll go into that in a minute. But the idea of the juice being worth the squeeze on the diet and that mental desire to pursue continuous weight loss, I've just lost that. I just don't really want to be dieting anymore. And so I don't know whether that's because I'm 12 weeks in, whether it's because my body finally reached this point where maybe I'm now at the below what would be my optimal body weight range. There's a number of factors that could go into it. But one of the things I discussed in the diet is I never had a refeed this whole time. I never oscillated more than 300 calories up or down from where my target was at any given time. I baked this big batch of brownies for this social event that I went to with some friends this weekend. They were all drinking beers, some chips, stuff like that. I didn't have any of that. I didn't have a beer. I didn't have any chips. I literally ate 12 ounces of steak that I brought, and I was feeling really good about myself. And then the brownies came out, and I was I'm just going to have one teeny nibble the size of my my fingernail, just because I want to know if I made good brownies or not, and it turned out they were fantastic. They were the best brownies I've ever made. And before I knew it, I had eaten 500 plus calories of brownies, and now I'm dealing with the ramifications of that. So the scale weight's been up a couple pounds. And, in my head, I know that it's 500 calories of brownies. It's, 1/7 of a pound of fat or whatever that is. But the scale has all these other considerations that happen. So the scale's been up a couple pounds. It's slowly been working back down. So it spiked up 2 pounds to 186. And then it was 185 and a half, then 185. And then it's 184 and a half this morning. So it's slowly working its way back down. I'm now 10 days away from my plan to eat up into my photo shoot, which means I'm 14 or 15 days away from the actual photo shoot itself. I don't really think that I gained 2 pounds from 500 calories of brownies. It's just the scale playing catch up at this point. And I think with a little bit of aggression and focus, I can still get to 182 and then eat my way back up. It's just, one of those things that happens, and I'm susceptible to that. I love sweets. I love brownies, and I didn't cheat at all the entire diet. So here we are, 12 days away from the end, and I had a whole bunch of brownies, and they were amazing. But that's my diet update. Figured I'd be as transparent as possible. Any thoughts on any of that?
It's funny that, I'm sorry, it's not funny, but it is funny that you're I've been great for 12 weeks. Then right when I'm at the time where I need it the most, I have a step of a falter step of I don't want to say commitment, but let's say that's a willpower thing. And I've always said I have very average at best willpower. It's like I plan to not need it, and that's generally how I set things up, right? High satiety food swaps, all of that stuff. Like the whole goal is to not need your willpower. I mean, interestingly there, yeah, it's not like you had 500 calories of brownies and put on 2 pounds of fat. That's like a very common misconception that people have. You have muscle glycogen increase from all of the carbohydrate, right? Which is then going to pull water into the cell. I mean, so it's a lot more than just like calories in, calories out works over a long enough time horizon. It breaks down in very acute settings of like, okay, I ate an extra 200 calories over the 6-hour period. Like what, it's when you break it down into those small subsets, the calories in, calories out loses its, it's like, I don't want to say accuracy or efficacy, but in very acute situations like that. So it's like, it's gut contents, it's potentially inflammation from like maybe a large increase. How much, I remember seeing the ingredients, was there butter in it?
Yeah, I mean, it was basically butter, sugar, and chocolate. Like, those are the main ingredients.
So it could just be like an increase in foods that you don't typically eat. You can get some like a low-grade intolerance, food intolerance response to that. I mean, there's a myriad of issues. Yeah. Or not issues, variables.
I mean, I had the most fat that I've had in like any given sitting, because brownies, like they're definitely sugar dense, but they're very fat dense, right? And then I had also had 12 ounces of steak along with that. So like I probably digested something like 50 grams of fat in a matter of like a sitting, and 50 is usually like my daily amount at this point. So
might just have to up the steps. Put the hammer down on the sleep. Do you have like any like sleep supplementation you're doing or anything like that to help you bridge some of those gaps?
I never do. I actually like, as we know on this podcast, I like to indulge in medical marijuana, and that is just the best thing ever for sleep latency. That's what you call it when you go to sleep, right? So yeah, my sleep latency is never, ever, ever an issue. I fall asleep almost unprompted at 9 p.m. almost nightly. And then it's really at that point just a matter of whether I get up to pee and how my body heat is at that point when I get up to pee, as far as whether I can get back to sleep easily or not.
Got it. Understood.
Yeah. You have some diet update too, and then maybe we can jump into some training updates.
Yeah, let's do it. So my kind of diet update is that I am what I call here fake recomping, which has actually been really, really fun. So I'm calling it like a fake / pseudo recomp because it's really just muscle that I have already previously like built that I am essentially reclaiming of sorts. And then while I'm also like slowly leaning out. So like I just submitted my 3rd check-in with Alex of physique development. So that means we've been doing this for 4 weeks now. My weight is only down on average, maybe about 1.5 pounds from like the high 194s to like the mid 193s. But I've been meaning to put together like a post and stuff on social media. But I mean, the change in the check-in photos is like very, very visible. So it's really, really cool. How like I was coming off a period, like I don't want to call it my worst, but like there was travel for essentially like kind of like a week and a half, right? Getting your setup, circadian rhythm off. My training prior to that was not great. So there's a lot of like variables, I guess, stacked away from how I normally would be. And then it was a really great time to start because I was like, had a good, true evaluation of like, this is when things are all over the place, when my schedule is inconsistent sort of thing. And then here it is like 4 hard, honest weeks back on track, even though my weight hasn't changed like significantly. I have a significant change in representation of that weight, which is really, really cool.
Yeah, dude, that's really legit. I mean, it was kind of inevitable that once you dialed things back in that muscle was going to come back really quickly. And that's just a cool testament that like for anybody that's at any intermediate or advanced stage of training, just how, what's the word I'm looking for? Suboptimal you can be And not lose much, but then whatever you do lose, how quickly it comes back.
That's always one of the fun things, is like how quickly things come back. And then kind of on a very similar avenue to that, we are changing my training starting next week. So I have been doing like a neurological phase here. So 4 weeks of that. And the interesting thing is like strength comes back like kind of rather quickly once you find like your movement patterns again, especially with like some of the compounds. But one of the things that also is when those like ramp up quickly, like some joints aren't quite like prepared for that. And I've like within like the last 2 weeks, like my lower back has been like tight again. Like my inner elbow pain is back from like pulling really, really heavy type stuff. So we're just gonna switch out to a metabolic phase now, which is going to be interesting. Let's call it that. But one of the things where I'm excited, right? Because the whole purpose of this was to learn more, but at the same time, I'm just hitting my stride and like adding. The interesting thing here is like everything's in kilos, so it's like, okay, I'm gonna put 5 kilos on the bar, and like that's another 11 pounds. You go up in dumbbells, and you're like, okay, I'm going up in 5 kilos dumbbells. That's 11 pounds. But it's like my strength is coming back, and I'm like, damn, it's fun because like I'm like just linearly loading things. I'm like, okay, well, I'm gonna, last week I hit the 45s for my last set of 5. This week I'm going to like the 47.5. So I actually have a 2.5 increase on that one. But it's like, okay, we did that. Now we're changing gears. And I'm like, but I'm just getting stronger again.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when the goal is hypertrophy, then the neurological phase isn't really about maximizing strength necessarily.
Exactly. And that's what he told me in my check-ins. Like he's like, and I'm kind of paraphrasing what he said. Not that I want to, speak for him, but he's like, basically we're only want to take a brief enough period away to resensitize to hypertrophy so we can get back to the goal. And I totally get that.
Yep, totally. And the way that like this strength type neurological phase is programmed is it's not, like we've discussed, it's not sets of like 1 to 3 where you're trying to like essentially be a power lifter. You're just very gradually slightly lowering rep ranges from what are hypertrophy rep ranges and mostly using similar exercise selection.
Yeah. Yep. So like I said, everything in mine has been between the 4 and 8 rep range.
Right.
Which has been fun.
Which is still like, that's how I trained with Max OT for years. Like all through college, I trained Max OT and literally everything was 4 to 8 reps, like everything. It was a hypertrophy program. It was just a low rep hypertrophy program. Cool. Well, I have some training updates too. Since that one bad day that I mentioned last week on ETP where I just had no motivation, I think it was the Saturday prior, I have had a slew of just fantastic training sessions since then. The one movement that almost ubiquitously is struggles during deficits for me over the years has been like chest pressing. And so I have the fly press movement with the dumbbells that I use. And last diet, that thing lost 2 reps across the diet. I was doing like 85 for 10. And then by the end of the diet last year, it was 85 for 8. And both of those were like a 0 RIR set type thing. This time I'm putting the fly press second so that I don't have the same emotional connection to it. So I do a bunch of cable pressing first, and then I do the dumbbell fly press after that. So my top set is with 75s. And I started the diet at 10 reps. It dropped down to 9, and I can't remember if it dropped to 8, but it's been hovering around 9 for most of this diet. And then just yesterday I got 10 again. So that was pretty cool on like a movement that I never progress on at all. Maybe it's brownie power, those extra calories, putting them to good use. And then I'm also seeing progress on, there's 2 movements that the lengthened overload stuff that I'm doing on them is progressing. So I think some of this could be neurological. So I'm not going to say that like I'm sitting here, gaining muscle, making hypertrophy happen in the end of my deficit. But it's pretty cool because here's kind of the way this is playing out. So on leg extension, I do a reverse drop set on one of the days. And last week when I did this reverse drop set, I went up to 225 for the reverse. And it's basically just supposed to be partial reps where the range of motion drops off. And that's exactly how it went at 225. It was like 80% range of motion, then a 70, then a 60, and it just kind of slowly dropped off. Well, yesterday or the day before when I was doing leg extensions, I did the reverse drop set with 235. So I did 10 pounds more than I did last week. And it could be argued that I got 1 or 2 full range of motion reps before I even began to drop off range of motion. So heavier weight and potentially more range of motion there. And then I noticed the same thing on my 45-degree hip extension, where 2 weeks ago when I did my 100-pound dumbbells, I got 1 full range of motion rep and then a bunch of partials. And then this week, I for sure got at least 2 full range of motion reps and then the partials thereafter. And whenever I'm dropping into these partials, I'm noticing more range of motion on the partial than I was getting in prior weeks too. So like my 8th partial this week had more range of motion than my 8th partial last week type thing. And this is, reviewed on video and stuff like that too. So it's cool that whether this is neurological or whatever this represents, it's just cool that it's unique and new enough that I'm able to make progress on something and actually pursue progress during this period of being in a deficit. So that's all super positive on the training side. And I am, it's now, as we're recording this, is June 14th. And so I'm really approaching kind of the point now where I'm about to hit my my deload week. So I think what the plan is going to be is when I begin my eat up into the photo shoot, which is supposed to start on 6/24, is 10 days from now. I think I'm going to just go into my deload from that point and take kind of an extended deload that'll go into the photo shoot and then finish with our travels to Wisconsin, which we're leaving for Wisconsin on June 30th. We're going to drive there. And so by the time I get settled in, it'll be July 2nd, something like that. And I'll probably start my new training cycle in the beginning of July, which will give me from 6/24 to 7/2. So 8 or 9 days of kind of deload period of time, which I think should actually facilitate a better photo shoot too. So in prior years, I've always trained as hard as I ever would leading up into the photo shoot. But I think this time combining the linear load of the carbs with the decrease in training volume and intensity may facilitate just better glycogen retention overall. So that is the plan going forward for the next 2 weeks or so. And I actually have a bunch of other stuff to talk about that I want to save for next episode, because it's some discussion around some stuff I've done with Cass, a recent podcast I did with him. I also have a follow-up to one of the questions we did on our Instagram Q&A last week. So let's save that stuff for some training content on next episode. And if you have any more updates, feel free to jump in. Otherwise, we can move into topic of the day here.
I just have a couple coaching updates. So I have 3 spots open for my coaching capabilities container that I'm accepting male coaches only right now, focusing on what I know best, and then we'll open up from there. I've decided to keep that super, super small format for the first cohort, so it will be maxed out at 5 people. And then I'll run that first cohort for a couple months before starting a second one. And then I will also have around 10 nutrition coaching spots for starting at the end of June. So I guess by the time this episode releases, if you're listening to this, you can reach out and ping me. That, again, males that I work with, be prepared to come, learn, ask a lot of questions. We will get labs. We will get DEXs. We'll do a lot of really cool objective stuff and teach you a whole bunch around your body and the pursuit of health and physique-related endeavors at the same time. So if any of that is interesting to you, please reach out to me. You can send me an email, aaron@strakernutritionco.com. You can hit my website, strakernutritionco.com, or you can easily ping me on social media as well. With that, Brian, you ready to get into our 5+ topics for or tips for productive gaining season?
Yeah, totally. Real quick, I just realized as you were sitting there promoting your coaching that I should probably promote some of the stuff that I do that's happening. So give me like 1 minute here.
Yeah, let's do it.
I always forget to do this, man. I don't know. I'm just like focused on the topic at hand. But we at Paragon are starting new cycles across all our programs on June 20th. So basically when this episode comes out on the 21st, we'll be 1 day into the new cycles. All the programs are starting new cycles, but more importantly and probably relevant is that physique programs, hybrid programs are both starting a strength cycle. And our strength cycles are probably a little more strengthy than the way that N1 or Alex Bush is doing it with you. So we do hang out in what would be the 1 to 6 rep range. And this cycle, I'm actually instituting a wave loading protocol for all of our strength work. So across 6 weeks, the reps are going to go 6 reps in week 1, 4 reps in week 2, 2 reps in week 3. So 6, 4, 2. And then the next 3 weeks, it's going to wave back through and it's going to go 5, 3, 1. And then obviously that 1 is going to be our max testing period. So the key to this cycle is the first 3 weeks, because if you nail the 6, 4, 2, then when you come back through and you go 5, 3, 1, you'll essentially do your 5s with the 4 rep weight, you'll do your 3s with the 2 rep weight, and then when you get to 1s, you'll basically be primed and ready to go for some 1 rep max testing. So the way we construct our cycles at Paragon is in 24-week macro cycles. So this is our 6-week strength phase, which will then be followed by a 6-week metabolic phase. And then from there, we'll go into a 12-week hypertrophy phase. So that's kind of the 24-week structure we use. And it should be a really cool strength cycle this time around.
Yeah, I like that. I love how I just love everything you do, Brian, with how you structure things and stuff. I'm always sending people your way because it's one of those things where it's like, I know it's done right. So I'm like, hey, if you want this, go to Brian because I know it's done well. So I'll always
appreciate that,
co-sign for you. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, man. Well, let's jump into the episode here. So should we start with basically when we broke this down into the 5 tips? As you may expect, Aaron's tips were mostly nutrition based and my tips were mostly training based. But I think that a lot of my training based ones could just be lumped into this one category called physiological changes that could enhance your training during a gaining phase or something along those lines. So we're basically going to put like the 4 main points that I had about training into the first section and just call it like training tips. So we'll start with that and then we'll jump into the 4 nutrition ones. And then Aaron and I actually collaborated on one of the nutrition ones too. And we both had the exact same answer here. So that one should be fun too. But jumping into training, I'll just go over quickly the 4 that I came up with, and then we can delve into them a little deeper if we want to. But essentially, I have volume or effort could be slightly higher. You could use it as an opportunity to specialize in a muscle group. You can take a more aggressive progression approach, and you could potentially select more lengthened, damaging overload movements. So those would be the 4. Do you want to jump in at all on thoughts on any of the 4 specifically?
Yeah, I mean, the first one, number 1, like volume and or effort could be slightly higher. And one of the reasons, and this is going to be something that kind of ties into another one, is like you have more food, so you have more recovery capacity. So you can like push things a little bit and your recovery capacity is increased so you can give it a little more than you normally would otherwise be able to without that additional recovery capacity.
Yeah, exactly. And when I wrote this out initially, I didn't put and or effort. I just wrote volume slightly higher, and then I changed it because I don't actually think that that's necessarily the right answer. It might be for some people, like slightly higher volume could be the approach that works for you, but it very much could be that you just want to work with slightly higher efforts. And either one of those can facilitate an increase in mechanical tension stimulus. So I feel much better kind of providing that option because I think the pendulum has swung a bit in the last year or two regarding, volume being the primary driver of hypertrophy thing. Like that notion is definitely still out there, but I think it's kind of swinging to it being this like balancing ratio scales thing of volume and effort. So whether you opt to take that more of like that 3 to 6 RIR approach and just hammer volume, or you want to do a bit higher effort approach and maybe you're somebody that already trains to 0 to 1 RIR in most cases. Well, maybe this is an opportunity for you to experiment and add some of those techniques that I use with the lengthened overload, the partials, the reverse drop sets, 1.5 reps, things like that, rest pause sets, where like, for example, even in my diet right now, like I never push past one set of any of those techniques. Like I'll do straight sets and then on the final set, I'll do one of those. But maybe in a gaining phase for me, I would consider adding 2 sets of those or 3 sets of those, maybe going into partials for more sets. So there's a number like rest pause sets too. Like I always do just one rest pause set. So like somebody DM'd me yesterday and was like, how would you count volume if you're doing 4 rest pause sets? And I'm like, wait, you mean like you do a buy-in set and then you rest 15 seconds and another set and then 15 seconds and another set and like all the way down until you've done 4 of those? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, God, that's really hard to say because you're getting like, 3 to 5 effective reps every time you do it. But I don't know if I like feel good calling it a full set. But that's like an example of an approach that I wouldn't take in a deficit that I think would be something that maybe could help facilitate growth and be able to recover from if you're in a surplus. So that balance of volume and effort is kind of up to you on how you want to implement that, but you definitely just have more recovery resources and ways that you can use that.
Yeah, I don't have anything else to add on that one.
Yeah. And then with specialization, the reason I think that that's so relevant here is thinking back to like last year and we did our abs experiment. Do you remember that? We did our abs experiment and then I posted about it on Instagram and I had a couple critiques that I really I like that people provided me this feedback, but they were like, can you really expect your abs to grow by specializing on them? Or even in that case, it was specializing because I wasn't training them and then I went to training them. But they're like, can you really expect them to grow because you're in a deficit? And that is very relevant because if you're going to specialize on a muscle group, man, you got to give it some nutrition to be able to support that growth. And so from that experience, I now will pretty much not put someone on any sort of specialization without at least being, maintenance or maintenance plus, so that you can provide the nutritional resources that you need to facilitate that growth. So then along the lines of with specialization, like, yes, you're providing it the building blocks and the nutrition so that it can grow. But then you also have the recovery available so that you can implement some of number 1, the volume or the effort on a specific muscle group. So you can kind of you have more freedom on the way that you can design your programming and essentially say like, hey, I want my arms to grow. So we're going to use some sort of tactic, whether it's like a escalating volume protocol or an increasing effort protocol or a combination of the two. And we're going to put this food to good use and we're going to grow a body part.
Yeah, I agree there. I don't have anything to add on that one. It's, super straightforward on, it doesn't make the most sense to specialize when your muscle building, resources are very thin.
Yeah. More aggressive approach to progression is the third one on training. And I think this one's kind of self-explanatory. It's like, if you're in a deficit, you may not increase at all, or if you do, it's probably mostly neurological and it's a rep here or a rep there. When you are giving your body more food and recovery resources, you might be able to progress a little faster. And I would say that like if you're oscillating on that spectrum of the philosophical approach to progressive overload of just kind of like sitting there and waiting for it to happen so that, you can then be like, oh shit, look, I got stronger. Let's add some weight, versus the more purposeful approach to progressive overload where you kind of, force the hand and maybe every week you're adding a pound or 2 pounds or 2 reps or a rep or whatever it is. Like you kind of go into the session with an intention to increase. It's really like a mental state. Maybe it's like either I go into the session to like see what happens, or I go into the session to be like, yo, I'm going to handle this shit and I am going to add a rep, or I'm going to add 2.5 pounds or whatever it is. So maybe your mindset is just such that you are going to push for progression instead of waiting for progression to come to you a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean that it's a perfect time for that because of, again, you're well fed, the recovery capacity is there, the extra resources to facilitate the adaptation are there, and you can really, I mean, at least I believe you should be pushing for that during these times.
Yep. And then the last one on training is selecting more lengthened overload movements. And I think this one, at least if you listen to us and follow us, is pretty self-explanatory too. You just, when you're in that fed state, you can just recover from more. So you should use more movements that are more effective. Not to say that there isn't advantage to using short overload movements. And that's actually one of the topics that we're saving for next episode with the discussion I had with Cass. So it's not that that short overload movements are bad. And like one of the really positives of short overload movements is the way that it can shuttle blood, nutrients and glycogen and stuff into the muscles a little bit more effectively and facilitate that, what's the actual
glucose reuptake
there? Perfect. Yep. There we go. So I think that is a reason to use short overload movements in a gaining phase too, but it's more just like, hey, if you're going to push the limits on things like RDLs and pendulum squats, and select more of these like lengthened bias movements for other muscle groups, then doing that and adding volume and effort and the things that we discussed above, in a gaining phase are just going to be a more prudent move as far as, making sure that you are recovered and not causing so much damage that you can't actually facilitate growth.
Yeah, I agree completely on that one. I don't have much to add on it.
Cool. Well, let's jump into the first nutrition category.
Yeah. And I mean, this one isn't so much nutrition, I guess, but what I have here is like, you just have to give yourself enough time to actually create a tangible change. That's probably not 8 weeks. That's definitely not 6 weeks. And it may not even be potentially 12 weeks. Like the last time I went on a gaining phase, it was 8 months long. And I put on, I was like 195. I put on about 11 to 12 pounds in that 8 months. And it was a lot of food. It's slow. Obviously, at a more advanced training age, it's going to be slower. But it's something that people often try and undershoot. They're like, I'm going to go on an 8-week gaining phase, and then I'm going to cut for 6 weeks. And I'm like, you're going to end up exactly where you are right now at the end of those, whatever, 14 weeks is. And it's, unless you're like a beginner or something like that, people think things will change much faster than they actually do. And if you do want to create a tangible change, actually improve your physique for when you do deficit, and let's say like a year from now, give yourself 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 months, or even up to a year plus of actually eating for change and putting on a significant amount of tissue. What do you think there, Brian?
Yeah, I fully agree. It makes me think of something else that's kind of related, which is you often hear this idea of cementing your gains, which more or less might be this concept of, after you do a gaining phase, you don't want to jump right into a deficit because there potentially is a delayed effect of hypertrophy that maybe takes 2 to 6 weeks to like fully cement. What are your thoughts on that? I've heard Mike Israetel talk a lot about this, and I don't know what if there's scientific basis for it. It's just conjecture.
I don't, to my knowledge, there's nothing really supporting it, nothing that I've seen at least. However, from my own theory and conjecture standpoint, I do somewhat agree with it, because let's say someone has like I have a client, right, who has like a goal weight of like 175. That was a 10-pound gaining phase. If we were to just like, okay, we hit it, let's go into a deficit now, like, because your food is so high once you near the end of this gaining phase, if you're just to like cut that back down to maintenance or whatever, you're gonna lose at least like 1 to 3 some pounds just through, because some of it's going to be like gut content, glycogen, and that sort of thing. So like with most things on a gaining phase, if there is a weight target or something like that, I like to overshoot a little bit, knowing that when we bring food back to an estimated maintenance, it's going to drop down a little bit. Then the same thing vice versa. Let's say someone has a goal of like 180 pounds for a fat loss phase. I'm going to recommend we push to like a 176, 177, because I know when we reverse up, we're going to put on 2, 3, 4, 5 pounds from there, sort of thing. So yeah, to wrap it up, nothing that I know in the research. However, I do agree with some of what Dr. Mike has, stated in this.
Gotcha. And then I want to also just pull out one other thing you said there that I relate to too, and I think is something others should take into account, is the idea of slow weight gain over a long period of time. And so you mentioned, I think it was 8 months and you gained 11 or 12 pounds. And so when you look at my last 3 years of my nutritional periodization, I follow a very, very similar route to that, where I diet for 3 to 4 months and I gain for 8 to 9 months. And during the period of gaining, it's almost always 12 to 15 pounds over 8 to 9 months. And so you're looking at, 1 1/3, 1.5 pounds, maybe up to 2 each month, depending kind of on the month and where I am in the process. Obviously, the first pounds from 182 to 190 are going to come on a lot faster. And then the pounds from 190 to 195 are going to come quite a bit slower. But I think that that's important, and it extends your runway. And that's the most important part. When like in the past, I would get really aggressive with my bulks because either I was done with the diet and I was like, all the food, or it was like, there's a massive change in lifestyle. Like I remember in college and post-college, it would be like, okay, it's dieting time. And there would be like all of this, focus on training and eating the right foods, but then also a bunch of cardio. Like I would prioritize going for runs and more bike rides and all of these different things, right? And then you'd go into gaining phase and suddenly all of that would stop. And it would just be like, okay, I'm gaining now. And I'm this like sedentary guy who just like drinks alcohol on the weekends and then trains really hard during the week. And though that wasn't super effective because the scale would just shoot up and then I'd want to diet again and it would be this like yo-yoing thing. So taking this more sustainable long-term approach of maybe 1 pound a month or 1.5 pounds a month or something like that is going to allow you to continue gaining over time. And maybe some of that cementing actually happens during the gaining phase, because it's not like you're going 8 to 12 weeks and then you're like, okay, I need to cement it. It's like you're going 9 months. So whatever cementing was happening, like probably already happened, Yeah,
I totally agree with that. That kind of ties into a couple things that else we're going to talk about. And just for that estimating thing, like shameless self-plug here, like I sell muscle gain and fat loss models that do this periodizing and estimating for you, based on the evidence-based research we have on natural bodybuilders for periods of gaining and fat loss. So if you want to go on a gaining phase and you don't know how much you should be aiming for per week, I have something that you can find on my socials, on my website, that literally does all that for you. And then the thing that I like that you said here, Brian, is it ties into a little bit of like what we're going to talk about on flexibility. So you said like, hey, I will diet for like 3 to 4 months, but then I will spend 8 to 9 months like not dieting. And when you're not dieting and eating more, we've increased, let's just talk about it right now. We'll flop them. So the next one we had was like incorporating more lifestyle and nutrition flexibility. I am a very, very big proponent of when we are dieting, the outcome, the goal is to get the job done, right? So many people try fat loss instead of achieving fat loss because they're trying to use the same flexibility that they were at, maintenance or in a surplus, but we're not. We have smaller margins. So I'm a big fan of like, we get in, we get what we came for, and we get the fuck out. But now we have 7, 8, 9 months of increased, flexibility for social events, family dinners, all of these things. When you're in a calorie surplus, it is the perfect time to leverage a lot of this flexibility. So the last thing that I have here before I'll kick it over to you, because this is the topic where we both had like a similar note, is in a realistic, calorie surplus scenario, you may need to break some of your otherwise like healthy eating habits. So the most kind of prominent one that I will use here is fruit juices. And I generally will still recommend not from concentrate fruit juices, but you may get to a period where like you're full, right? You really don't want more food, but if your gaining is slowing down and you're, under that rate of gain now, we may incorporate some more calorically dense, lower volume food items. A really great one here is like an orange juice, right? If you're in a calorie deficit, blowing 50 grams of carbs on orange juice is a terrible idea. When you're in a calorie surplus and you don't want to fucking eat anymore and you still have more food to eat, orange juice is a great idea. So just understanding like the appropriateness of the context, what the end goal is, and flipping some of those, healthy eating habit no-goes to a to-go or go-to can be beneficial for sure.
Yeah, I always kind of giggle when people bring up the like things like liquid calories, like, just guzzle orange juice or grape juice or whatever. And Abel and I actually discussed this on a podcast we were on a couple weeks ago. But we always find it funny because neither of us feel like we would have any problem eating food as long as, we don't have to necessarily focus on food quality. And so when you're talking about just guzzling orange juice, you're literally talking about like, taking down 50 grams of sugar. So it doesn't get much lower food quality than just like guzzling sugar. I mean, there certainly are ways you can guzzle sugar and fat together. But like, it's just like if I have 200, 300 calories, instead of guzzling orange juice, I'm probably going to have like a bagel and cream cheese or something along those lines where I get a similar calorie dose, but actually get to eat foods that I enjoy. So I just think that's funny. And Abel, this conversation came up because Steve Hall was talking about it, how he can never get past like 4,000 calories without supplementing with like, liquid calories, whether it's a mass gainer or like things like orange juice and stuff like that. And so we were just joking around what our limit would be. And Abel was like, man, it would be like 6,000 calories or something like that, And that was my awful Abel accent. But I don't know, man. I think there's certainly like a cumulative piece to it too. Like over time, 4,000 calories gets more difficult over time, then 5,000 gets more difficult and 6,000 gets more difficult. So maybe I could eat 6,000 for like 3 days, but then the fourth day I would be like, I think I'm just going to fast because I'm going to die otherwise type thing.
It's also, it's relative to the distribution of the calories. There's a lot of people out there who will still say like past a certain level, like more dietary fats, like is just not going to fuel your gains nearly as much as extra carbohydrate would. And that was kind of more what I was referencing to. Like when I hit the point where I think in my last gaining phase where my carbs were at like 550-ish per day and I was fucking over it. And like my coach was like, I couldn't do any more oats because I couldn't digest them. And he was like, I was doing, I think like 75 grams of carbs a day of orange juice. Because it was just so much volume of carbohydrate. You can only eat so much like rice and oats and cream of rice and bananas and different fruits and stuff before it does catch up. Or it's just like, it just digests slow and you're just uncomfortable for sure.
Yeah. I think this begs the question though of like, if you're in a gaining phase and you're giving yourself a caloric surplus, which is like the ultimate catalyst for growth here, like psychologically, there's an argument that trying to get super specific not maybe specific's the wrong word, but trying to get so nuanced where, I'm really working on keeping fats down. Like I'm in this gaining phase, but I'm still going to keep my fats under 75 or whatever like a reasonable number is. And I'm going to take my carbs up to like 550. I mean, like psychologically, that takes a lot of work to manipulate your diet in a manner that allows that to happen, because you still have to basically be eating the exact same foods that you eat when you're dieting. It doesn't really open you up to the ability to have a lot of this nutritional freedom if you're still trying to hit 550 carbs and 75 grams of fat a day. So like for me, I just wonder whether that optimality of really, you know, like the opportunity cost of, I have to be so focused on this all the time, like basically year round now, because I have the time where I'm dieting where I have to be super focused on it. And then I have my gaining phase where I also need to be super focused on it. And psychologically, that's burdensome for me. So I find the 3 or 4 month dieting period to be the period where I really want to like dial in and focus on that. And then I use the 8 or 9 months of the off season to kind of psychologically separate from the rigidity of the diet and give myself that freedom to have more of those foods where the fats can get up to like 100 or 120, and then therefore the carbs can stay at 400 or something like that, and they don't need to get all the way up to 550 to facilitate that gaining phase.
I agree with that. And I think there's definitely like a threshold. I think that like 100 to 120 is probably like nearing the top of that threshold. But I know people who would be like, I can't confidently say enough myself, but I do know of people who understand like the biochemistry of certain like pathways much better than I do, who we could bring on the podcast to really say like, this is why you push carbohydrate as hard as you can and you want to limit fat. But I do know people where they're like, they'll just push fats up to like the 200s, the 220s. And at that rate, like if you're not using it, it's not optimal for replenishment of glycogen and fueling your training sessions anyway. It's already coming in the same, chemical makeup that you stored in adipose tissue. You're just going to get fatter faster. But it's like, where is that threshold? You know, and I can't confidently say where that is.
Yeah. Well, I know there's certainly experts that I respect on both sides of that spectrum, because, you know, like Eric Helms is a perfect example of somebody who always takes that like kind of middle of the road, like it may not move the needle that much approach. And it like bothers me when he does it with training sometimes, where he's like, yeah, just sit down and stand up. You're squatting, you know, it's cool. And so there's like no nuance there. And I'm like, but dude, like, come on, you know, but like, then I when he aligns with the way that I look at things, like every time he talks about the off season and he's like, yeah, just carbs and fat, however you want them is fine. You know, protein at body weight, like don't overthink it too much. And so when he says that, I'm like, yeah, dude, totally. Like I fully align with you, you know? So his kind of middle of the road approach, I guess, it just depends if you want to align with it or not in either case. And then you have someone like Steve and Dr. Mike on the other side that are like, yes, push the carbs for all of those reasons that you said.
And there's more, not to really, go down the rabbit hole here, but there's going to be genetic differences, person to person, where if fats go above a certain level, your lipids are going to start to tank. Or I guess would be the complete opposite of tank. They're going to take off, right? So your LDL is going to be super high. Right. Your triglyceride is going to be super high. If you were to take that same, calories, and now it becomes an opportunity cost, push those over to carbohydrate. Let's say you're insulin sensitive and your, glucose, what's the word I'm looking for? Your, let's go with insulin sensitivity, is, sufficient. You're not going to get that same, or I don't want to speak in absolutes. You may not get that same negative impact on lipids by taking that same amount of calories and pushing it over to carbohydrate. And then vice versa, there's going to be people who have insulin sensitivity issues. And when their carbs go up, past a certain threshold, they get like elevated liver enzymes and things like that. Their fasting insulin starts to rise. Their fasting glucose starts to rise. There may be other reasons, why these are the cases. But for those people, if that's all they know, if those are the only tools, disposable to them or available to them at this time, it may not be optimal, but they should push the fats, because one of the things that I have on one of my last tip is like, health needs to should be a priority for, you know, a lot of these considerations still. So it's like,
yeah,
it's a lot. It's a lot to unfold is basically what we're getting at.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I fully agree, man. I fully agree. I think like ultimately to boil it down for me, it's really like a psychological piece of, I don't think that this is sustainable for me if I had to be diet Brian mindset 12 months a year. And so for diet Brian mindset to exist for 3 to 4 months a year, then free living Brian has to exist the other 8 or 9 months a year. And that's just like kind of, I guess, a sacrifice that I've decided is okay to make.
And I completely agree with that. And everyone is going to have that. It's a spectrum, right? And everyone's going to exist on that spectrum in different tendencies or ratios, I guess I should, or percentage in either direction.
Yep, for sure.
Cool. I think we kind of hammered that one down. So the fourth one we have is that I have here the quotes, lean gains are actually the goal, right? So it often gets bastardized into thinking that like you are going to put on 100% lean body mass and not add any body fat, which is not the case for us natural, trainees. But that doesn't mean that you need to go the GFR or GFH method, which is get fucking huge and just eat everything and get overly fat. Because the interesting thing, or I guess it's not really interesting, it's kind of sad, is you cannot force feed hypertrophy. So if, let's say, based on your training age, your exercise modality, your genetics, and your lifestyle, you can put on a maximum of 0.4 pounds per month of actual lean body mass. And that's not all going to be like actual, tensile tissue. Some of that's going to be intracellular fluid, which is technically, lean body mass. If you put on 0.5 pound per month and 0.4 of that goes to lean body mass, that is an incredible, partitioning ratio, P ratio. If you put on 3 pounds of weight per month and you're only putting on 4 pounds of lean body mass, you are just getting fatter, faster.
0.4.
Sorry. Yeah. 0.4. Thank you, Brian. You're just getting fatter, faster than you really need to. So you will put on some body fat. That's just the nature of the beast. And the more advanced you get, the worse that kind of ratio becomes. And you need to put on more body fat to, facilitate more of those gains. But you do not want to necessarily try and force feed your hypertrophy, because you are just going to have to deal with that then on the back end and make your diet much harder than it needs to be.
Yeah, I mean, a super good example of this is like in college when I gained 30 pounds in freshman year, and I was not doing it healthily. I was eating all the crappy food that there was, and I would random guess looking back in history, that it was probably like half and half, 15 fat, 15 muscle. If I even ate the amount of calories I was eating then right now, not even to mention the quality of food. Like say I was even doing it clean and I was eating as many calories as I was doing back then, I would be gaining almost all fat. Like I think of that 30 pounds that I gained, it would be like 3 to 5 would be like glycogen and other fluids, and then maybe like 1 pound of muscle, and then like 24 pounds of fat. And so this kind of just speaks into, the way that this happens as we become more advanced. And so when I did the 30 pounds, I was in my 4th year of training. So I was able to really realize a lot of that food into growth. Whereas now, like I would even venture that when I go from 182 to 195 over my 8 or 9 month gaining period, I would still say the same, that maybe 3 to 5 pounds are like, glycogen and fluid retention and food volume and stuff like that. And then maybe there's 0.5 pound of muscle, maybe 1 pound. And then the other 0.5 pound or so is realized when I diet, because maybe I do a better job dieting than I did the last time I dieted, right? So I do all of this oscillating up of nutrition and the coming down and the up and the down and all of that for like a total net gain of 0.5 pound to 1 pound of muscle over the course of a year. So in my case, it makes zero sense for me to do anything above the bare minimum above maintenance, right? Like, it could even be argued that me going from 182 to 195 over 9 months is too fast. Like, I'm gaining too much fat during that time. And I would probably be better off going from like 182 to 188 and just kind of hanging out between like 187 and 190 most of the time, because there probably isn't a whole lot of muscle to be gained as the body weight creeps up. So anyway, that's my thought on the matter. And I think that it very much is individual and depends on where you are in your training journey.
Yeah, it definitely is going to be individualized, like I said, and like you said, with your training age. But there's information on it if you go looking, which is pretty cool.
Yep, for sure.
The last thing that I have here, number 5, is keep your health a priority. This is something that, like Brian was just alluding to with the whole gaining 30 pounds. It is something that I have bastardized really, really poorly in the past. And really, it was a perma bulk that I had went on for, like 2.5 years minus some time spent recovering from a knee surgery that really gave me the opportunity to really start learning about some of these things. So we have a quote here from Brandon DaCruz, who's a friend and someone we've had on the podcast before, because something he says often is a healthy body is a responsive body. So if your diet quality absolutely tanks and you're a bloated, inflamed mess, don't mistake the importance of an optimally functioning body for your goal of hypertrophy. If you are super inflamed, if you're not digesting your food, if you're having like super loose bowel movements and you're super gassy and stuff, do not mistake that you think that you will be, assimilating those nutrients and functioning well with these things going on. Those are signals from your body saying, asshole, look what's going on. Can you please fucking stop? It would behoove you to listen.
A lot of that happens downstream too. So like you have one of those things that's, like you're eating all this food. So then the downstream effect is, loose bowels. And then a downstream effect of that is, your body temperature is irregulated while you're sleeping. So you're constantly up and like, your stomach's constantly churning stuff over. And then you're going into your workouts and you're underslept, you're underfocused, under-recovered. Your body is using all of these resources to try and figure out what's happening in your gut. And maybe you're losing some of the mental acuity where you would have energy to support brain function. So I think that there's a ton of downstream effects associated with putting shitty food into your body. And I know that I can feel it. Like, fuck, I hadn't had brownies in 12 weeks. I hadn't had any like high fat, high sugar foods. And then boom, I have brownies. And like literally the next day I woke up and just brain fog and felt awful. And it's kind of funny how if you do that enough, I remember looking back in my youth, my earlier days, that if you eat enough really shitty food in back to back days, then that just becomes your new normal. And you just kind of feel like that's the way it is. And you don't realize that there's better out there, that you can feel a ton better, have more energy, more mental focus and stuff like that. And then all of that has those cascading downstream effects into like the quality of your training and stuff like that.
You really hit the nail on the head there. I mean, it's really, really important. The thing you said about that sliding cascade effect, I call that the diminishing subjective state of well-being. So you think this is normal, but it's really just you have subjectively been, or I guess objectively been sliding in your perception of what normal is, has been sliding with that into where you just feel normal when you're bloated and, inflamed sort of thing. So
Yep.
Yeah, so those are the top 5 from Brian and I. We had some notable mentions here, but I think we kind of ended up covering them in our correspondence from each.
Yep.
So the last thing I will have that I feel like maybe we didn't cover is we kind of covered it at the end. Pay attention to your GI, your gastrointestinal tract, the quality of your digestion. That is something that eventually will kind of put the brakes on your gaining phase, because there comes a time where your body can really only digest so much food. There's only so much time in the day, that sort of thing. just know that, pay attention there. You can always pull back a little bit, get things moving a little bit better, and then slowly titrate up again.
Yep. Cool.
Anything else you want to add on to the back end of this one, Brian?
No, I think we're good on this. I'll just tease the next episode real quick with the 3 points that I want to discuss, at least as part of updates next week, if not as part of the topic of the day. But we have some discussion around short overload movements and the utility of them. We have something I've really been intrigued about recently that I mentioned, I think, on the last episode here, which is the idea of grinding reps versus kind of this more stop and release. And kind of some insights into that through a discussion with Cass. And then the guy that asked on our last Instagram Q&A last week about whether there's a minimum session volume. He had a follow-up question about how to know when a muscle's recovered and making sure that you're not waiting too long to hit that muscle group again. So I think that those three can create some interesting discussion for next week. And I'm sure we'll have a couple other things to add to that pod as well.
Yeah, I'm pumped that some of them got pushed to next week because I haven't finished part 2 of the Come At Me Bro episodes with you, Abel, nice. Cass, and Dave. So give me time to finish that and we can talk about stuff.
I like it. Sounds good.
Awesome. So as always, everyone, thank you so much for listening to Eat, Train, Prosper. Brian and I will talk to you next week.